Happy Wednesday, everyone. Storm Team 8 meteorologist Amanda Hawley here.
And I'm meteorologist Lee Spann. Thanks for joining us for the third day of Weather Break.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hanging out over here today. Excited for another edition.
Yeah, so we're running because of the press conferences about the coronavirus and things like that. We are a little late coming to you today, but we're glad that you joined us because we have a very important topic today to talk about, especially for those of you who live right here in Florida.
It's very prevalent every single year. Today we're going to be talking about hurricane formation, the development of tropical cyclones, tropical storms, and hurricanes.
That's right. So if you live along the coast, or you know, every summer we start tracking these. And we just wanted to give you a little bit of information about how they form, so they're not quite as scary when they start coming toward us, because then we know, you kind of know exactly what's happening and how strong those winds might be.
And then as we get to hurricane season and we're tracking them, you can follow along with us, of course, during Tracking the Tropics.
Yes, that's online and on our app every Wednesday.
That's right. So let's get right to it, Lee. The first thing that we need for a tropical cyclone to really start to develop is warm water, and that water has to be 80 degrees or above, which typically we have a lot in the Atlantic Ocean during the summer months.
Because right now in the Gulf of Mexico, we're starting to warm that temperature up. We're already in the upper 70s. The Gulf of Mexico gets a lot warmer than the Atlantic because it's a smaller body of water. So you guys know it sometimes gets a little chilly in the winter when you put your feet into the water, but by the summer you can hop right in and it feels nice and warm, and that feels great to us. It's actually what the hurricanes like as well.
Yeah, so the warm water is one of the ingredients that we need. We also need moist air on top of that warm water. And when that air is sitting right above the water heats up that air. And then, as we learned on Monday,
yes, that warm air rises, right?
Warm air rises. So now we have this warm air rising and it starts to build a cloud.
And yes, and so we talked about on Monday about the condensation level. So it's a clear air, right? And then it goes up and up and up. And once it hits a certain point, it starts to condense, just like on the outside of your cold water glass. You know, you get that water on the outside. That's condensation. And so the gas starts to become little droplets of water, and that's what causes the clouds to form. That's when you start to see them.
So that's the first part that happens. But as we have this air rising, we now have an empty space in here because the air has now risen and formed the clouds. So what happens is air from that surrounding space starts to move in and fill this void. And now we have a circulation forming. So this air is rushing in to fill the void, and then it's rising as it warms, continuing to fill and form those clouds. And now, as we get this bigger cloud to form, because of the Earth's rotation, we start to see this area start to rotate into a low pressure. It rotates counterclockwise into a low pressure.
And an area of low pressure is always, you know, we have a lot of low pressures. They come on land and they come over the water. But when they're over the water like this, we are concerned about them. A lot of times when you get that warm water, forming stronger and stronger winds in tropical systems.
Right, so they start off very weak, and it could just be a very weak rotation, could be some thunderstorms, and then it dissipates. But sometimes when you have the perfect conditions, it continues to rotate. It continues to get a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger as well, as long as you have those main ingredients, the warm water and the moisture. And then when that starts to happen, we see a tropical system form. And the first thing that usually forms is a tropical depression.
Yes, and that is, it doesn't have a name, it becomes tropical depression, whatever number starts with tropical depression 1. It's very weak, it has winds less than 39 miles per hour, but it's starting to get sort of the rotation in the entire system, and we start watching it very closely here at Storm Team 8.
And then when it gets a little bit stronger than that, when we get wind speeds of 39 miles per hour or greater, we see a tropical storm form. And that's when we really have a more organized circulation, and that's when we also get a name for the system as well.
So it's a very specific time. I know we talk a lot about these names when we, on air, and you see them on the news and things like that. So the names are important because they designate sometimes we might have multiple tropical systems happening at the same time. The Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico are huge. So instead of calling them, we could have named them 1, 2, and 3. Instead, we give them people names, and they start and they go about alphabetically.
That's exactly right. So that happens when we get a tropical storm, when wind speeds are greater than 39 miles per hour, up to 73 miles per hour. That's the tropical storm designation. But as the storm continues to intensify, you have continuing those perfect conditions of warm water. You have the moisture surrounding the storm. You don't have any winds impacting the storm from the upper levels, kind of shearing it out. We get a hurricane that forms when those wind speeds hit 74 miles per hour.
And that's where we really, when a storm like that, it starts to do a lot. If it runs over any islands in the Atlantic or anything like that, you'll really see some pretty big devastation at Category 1 hurricane status, because Category 1 is just the beginning. After that, it can get stronger and stronger, and that's what we'll see here as those winds start to wrap around that area of low pressure faster and faster. Some of them, they can reach up to 100, 150 miles per hour sometimes.
Or even stronger, like last year when we saw with Hurricane Dorian. So there's 5 categories total, Category 1 through 5. After the 5th category, we don't have anything more, because the damage that would be experienced from a Category 5 storm, those wind speeds or greater, it doesn't really make any difference.
Yeah, so we completely level building, so it doesn't matter what there doesn't need to be another category. We actually got asked that a lot during Dorian, but once a Category 5 comes through, it pretty much levels everything. So that is the biggest and worst category. And most people would want to stay far, far away from any Category 5 hurricane. And we do ask you to evacuate, but there's a certain group of people who go right into these major hurricanes.
That's right.
We're going to send it over to Ian Oliver, who got to join them in that major hurricane recently.
That was quite an experience.
Yeah.
Let's quickly check in with our folks on Facebook. We got a number of people watching. Lynn, former science teacher, she says,
hi,
great
Lynn.
job, ladies. You guys are doing awesome. Peggy is watching from Colorado. We've got a number of folks watching from here in Tampa. Hello to Herbert.
Hi, Herbert.
We got a couple of questions coming in. Let us know where you're watching from. Let us know what your questions are about this. We will get to those coming up. Quickly want to address, we had one question.
Okay.
Is there anything out there? We have a lot going on right now in the world. There are no tropical systems out there. This is just meant to be educational. Couple months out still from the tropical season.
June 1st.
We're just June 1st, so we're just talking about how these things actually form. We'll get to that in a few months' time. We'll be watching the tropics.
With all the craziness going on, we also are not tracking anything tropical.
Absolutely. But yes, last year, unfortunately, it was a very devastating storm in Dorian. I got an opportunity to fly into the system. What these hurricane hunters do, they perform a critical service for us. They fly into the storm and they release something called a dropsonde, and it's essentially like a reverse weather balloon. It drops a device that measures the meteorologic conditions all the way down through the storm. The storm is sampled in a grid pattern. Then we take that information and we ingest that into the forecast models, and the forecast models become much more accurate once we have this information. So look at this video.
At that video. That's
absolutely
amazing.
This was an experience right there. If you've ever taken a bumpy flight, flying with the hurricane hunters, the seatbelt sign is on the entire time. You're bouncing around like this. You get into the eye, and it's like the most beautiful flight you've ever been on. It's actually called the stadium effect, where you get into the eye of the storm, the center of the circulation. As Lee and Amanda were discussing, in the eye wall, that's the most intense part of a tropical system, where the air is rising and it's very turbulent. But actually in that center, you get some sinking air, you get high pressure, the air dries out and clears out. When you fly in, you see this incredible effect. You're essentially, they call it a stadium effect, because if you can imagine being on a football field and looking around at the stands, that's essentially what the clouds look like, and it's an absolutely unbelievable sight to see.
And Ian, explain to them why it's important to fly into these storms, because you might be thinking that it's just fun, but there is important data that they are getting when they fly into them.
Absolutely, and I actually had the opportunity to release one of those dropsondes into the storm. There's a little tube, essentially, more or less it's a vacuum tube that just allows them to drop these devices right out of the center of the aircraft. In a typical flight, you'll see them drop about 20 of these, 20 to 25, and they fly through the storm in a very specific pattern, and that allows a nice sampling of the storm so that information can be ingested into the forecast models that see a huge bump up in forecasting accuracy after that. My flight, we had the unique distinction that we were testing a new instrument that essentially detects wind speeds using more or less a laser off of the ocean surface. These folks were from the Hurricane Research Division of the National Hurricane Center. So for about 3 hours, we just punched through the eye wall, the most intense part of the storm. So that was certainly something. Trying to write a story on it on my laptop and dealing with a little bit of some questionableness.
Ian was all shook up. Let's just
You
say
could
that.
say that. Yeah. Yep.
But we want to thank the hurricane hunters are actually based right here in Lakeland, Florida, and they so Ian drove out to Lakeland, Florida, and then they took off from there. And what they are able to do, all the information that they give us, is the reason that we can then tell you, hey, this is an area that's going to be most affected. This is the area that needs to evacuate. And over the years, the accuracy of those predictions has gotten better and better and better. And it has a lot to do with those hurricane hunters and the models that they work with. So
and that's
thank you to all of those
as
guys.
you guys mentioned,
and
as the
ladies.
storm's developing, if it's not quite a tropical depression yet, a newly formed tropical depression, forecast models have a very difficult time predicting a system that hasn't developed yet. So once there's a well-defined center of circulation, you can understand why.
Yeah.
If it doesn't exist, the forecast model doesn't know where it is. So once it develops and you get that center of circulation, now the hurricane hunters can get in there, they can sample the storm, see exactly what it looks like right now, and that does a whole lot for being able to predict where it's heading and in what state. Once you know what it looks like, once you can see it, once you can sample it.
And those actual measurements that the dropsonde gets are very important because we don't have any measurements being taken out in the Atlantic Ocean. So it's basically a guess for the forecast models based on estimates from satellites. But if we can take those actual measurements with those dropsondes, it's actual beginnings of where the storm is at right now, how strong those wind speeds are, put that in the forecast model, and then the outcome is a lot more accurate, like Ian said.
So we talked. We did get one question. Is there anything out there? No, there's nothing out there right now. But hurricane season starts every year on June 1st. Now, there have been tropical systems outside before June. We often get maybe a subtropical type weak storm in May. But we really ramp up between July, August, with the peak of hurricane season happening in September. So that's sort of where we're looking at. The ocean waters have to get warmer and warmer and warmer, and then you get these stronger and stronger and more storms. But we talked about those names, so we're going to show you what the names are, starting with the very first tropical storm that gets named this year.
And that would be Arthur. Of course, we start with the A name and then we run through most of the alphabet. There are a few letters that are omitted, but most of the alphabet is on here. Arthur's our first name, then we go to Bertha and Cristobal, and then all the way down the line. And hopefully we don't get to too many, but it's the season to be told.
Yes, and the names are, they go male, female, and so since this year it starts with Arthur, next year it'll be an A name that's a female name. And they are chosen by the World Meteorological Organization, because you'll notice there are some maybe Spanish sounding names, maybe even some French sounding names. So what happens is any country that can be affected by a system in the Atlantic, which includes all of the Caribbean islands, then their nationality type names go into the World Meteorological Organization. And these names will be repeated in 6 years. There's only 6 lists of names. But there is a caveat. If there is a really bad storm, we retire that name. For instance, a Katrina. We never want to ever have to talk about another Katrina again. So they retire that name, and in 6 years, a different K, female K name will be used.
Yes, and that list, that new K name has already been decided.
Yes.
There are a list of pending names that the World Meteorological Organization has. So a lot of people always ask me, how can I get my name, named after a hurricane? And that list has already really been decided.
Yes, well, you can certainly write to the World Meteorological Organization, right, Ian?
Yeah, we had a great question come in from Janet.
Hi, Janet.
I love this question. She said, is the device that they drop similar to what they tried to get the info from the tornado in the movie with Helen Hunt, which is, of course,
Twister.
a classic meteorological
Dorothy.
movie, Twister. The hurricane hunter is the Dodge Ram.
Yeah.
Dorothy is
Yeah.
the dropsondes.
Yeah.
These devices, I
guess the idea is similar.
The idea is exactly the same.
Yeah.
The device is more like a weather balloon than those little devices that were in
the
Dorothy.
disc.
But the
So-
idea is essentially the same.
Yeah, I mean,
A weather balloon is something that we take a balloon, fill it with helium. The National Weather Service does this twice a day across the whole country, and that goes up through the atmosphere and samples the atmosphere that way. Hurricane hunters fly into the storm and drop dropsondes that fall down and sample the storm in a downward motion. But the data that they collect, similar.
yeah, so it's just, it's basic data too. It's wind speed, it's pressure, it's temperature, it's dew point, and it's taking that as it goes down through levels of the atmosphere. If you were with us yesterday, we talked about that the atmosphere is different. It's several miles high, and it's different as you go up and through these different layers. And so it's important to get those, that data. And as the dropsonde is falling, it's also sending out data. I mean, it looks it looks low tech. It looks like it's got these little wires and all these things, but it's really high tech stuff that they drop into the ocean a couple times as they fly through it.
Ryan actually checked in with a good question. He said, is there anywhere more dangerous to get a hurricane? And of course, really here in the Gulf Coast, we're at the most risk in our nation, but there is something that's exactly the same as a hurricane. It's just called something different. It's a typhoon. That's what they're called in the Pacific, the Eastern Hemisphere. The western part of the Pacific has very warm water. That's where you can get typhoons and super typhoons that typically actually can reach strengths that are greater than what we see.
But essentially, they're the same thing.
They
They're
are.
just given a separate name based on different parts of the world. So you could have a hurricane, you could have a cyclone, you could have a typhoon. All of those things are areas of low pressures, and they're essentially the same thing, just called something different. Now, again, in some areas of the world, they can get a little stronger.
And anywhere along a coastline
Yes.
is at risk of at some point, if you were along a coast, of getting, especially a warm body of water coast, you're at risk of getting one of these tropical systems to come on shore. And right here in the Tampa Bay area, we have the warm Gulf water that's so beautiful and we love it, but we know that sometimes it can get a little scary out there.
Herbert asked about, this is a really good question too. He said, could these hurricane flights nowadays not be automated with AI and remote control for greater safety?
In large drones, things like that.
In the future, at some point, that could happen, but this isn't just an aircraft that's flying through and dropping stuff out the back, because otherwise I would say absolutely. These things are like floating laboratories.
Yeah.
You wouldn't believe the amount of technology that's on the plane, and that information's being sent in real time back to the aircraft. From there, the data goes to the National Hurricane Center. When I was on the flight, it was probably a dozen of us, 15 people, 2 pilots, and a lot of scientists that are actually doing a lot of the work right there. Several projects going on at once, so it isn't just the storm sampling. Otherwise, I would say at some point in the future, probably.
I have no doubt that they might supplement. They would still send the hurricane hunters out, but then to just get this every couple of hours, they might send a large drone or something like that. That I'm sure will happen at some point. But what we want to do now is go ahead and give you your at-home project, because this one will actually be beneficial as we go into hurricane season, which starts June 1st. We always tell you to be ready, no matter what the hurricane predictions are, that on June 1st, you are ready for hurricane season. And one of the main things that you need to have ready is a supply kit.
And this is something that you can build right now, for the most part, going into hurricane season and have ready.
That's right, because you and your family, a lot of you are at home and trying to find something to do. So here are some ideas for your hurricane supply kit. First of all, water is one of the most important things. And so everybody is going to repeat after me, okay? You need 1 gallon of water per person per day.
Per day.
So we're going to do that again. 1 gallon of water per person per day. So if you have 4 people that live in your house, you need 4 gallons of water for those people each day.
And we usually say for about 3 days.
The saying goes, the first 72 is up to you, and that means 72 hours, which is 3 days. So what do you need in your house right now? We're already a little quarantined, but you can still go to the grocery store and things like that. Imagine if you couldn't even really leave your house. There were no grocery stores. What would you need to survive for 3 days? And obviously, food is one of them. So that's non-perishable foods. Unlike our quarantine now, you might not have electricity. You might not be able to turn your stove on or use your microwave. So it needs to be things that you can almost quite literally eat out of a can.
And the third thing would be important documents. So this would be things like insurance, maybe birth certificates, important documents that you will need going forward that you don't want damaged if for some reason there's a flood or, you know, they can get damaged by rain.
Okay, flashlight and batteries. We talked about not having power, which means it's going to get dark. We would prefer you not to light candles because that just adds another danger of fire. And batteries.
And then another thing would be an extra battery for your cell phone, because cell phones, if we have cell service and the towers don't go down, that will be a very important source of information from us here at WFLA, the news, as well as, you know, radio and things for you to just continue to listen to updates.
Right, so we would be telling you where you can get sandbags ahead of time, and then we would be telling you where food supplies might be and things like that. So your cell phone, assuming that we have cell service, is really going to be your lifeline. You'll be able to get on, contact your family, let them know where you are, and things like that.
And those are all after the storm. But during the storm,
yes,
you could be watching us during Tracking the Tropics, giving you updates on where the storm is and where it's going and when conditions would be improving as well.
So medication, a lot of times you can get, especially as we get closer to hurricane season, you will be able to get an extra supply of medication so that if you can't get back to the pharmacy or you can't get back to the doctor, you have that extra supply.
Cash is something else good to have, because if we lose electricity, then you can't use your credit card or your debit card. First aid kit is also good to have in case, you know, someone were to get hurt in your home, maybe glass breaks. If you forgot to board up those windows, you want to be able to take care of that, because emergency personnel may not be able to get to you.
You know, and even afterwards, I mean, if you're trying to clean up your yard, you might cut yourself with you know, whatever it is, you'll need to have a first aid kit around. And folks, can get a little boring. We're quarantined now and it feels boring, right? Well, imagine not having any television. It's hot. So books, puzzles, kind of those things that now we're pulling out. Think about those and put them in your supply kit.
And the last suggestion would be to have something for personal hygiene. If running water isn't available, you'll want to have some way to kind of clean yourself off.
So what we ask you to do, of course, is take a picture of your supply kit or make a list of things and take a picture of that. Hashtag weather break, because this is an at-home project, but it's something that we're going to be asking literally every person in the Tampa Bay area and anywhere along the coast to be doing in the next few weeks and months before hurricane season starts. So you can get a head start on everybody, kids. So water, food, important documents, flashlights, all the things right now that you can either be making a list that you know you want in your supply kit.
Especially those activities.
Yeah, because you know what you like now. So please take a picture, hashtag weather break.
All right, let's get to a couple quick questions before we wrap it up for the day. Carter wanted to know, how fast do hurricanes spin, and is the center actually calm?
The center is extremely calm.
Very calm.
Yeah.
As Ian was explaining earlier, it's an area of high pressure, whereas the entire system is an area of low pressure. But high pressure is where we have that sinking air, and that's why we get clear skies in the center, and it's very calm and nice for those pilots when they fly through into the center.
Yes.
A little bit of a break.
Yes, and there's even, you know, in times, normally we tell people don't go outside if the eye goes over you, but actually in Dorian, people were able to rush to safety because they were able to get to a different house after, they went through one half of the storm, and then you got that one little bit of time where they were able to run to a different.
And that storm was moving so slow.
Slowly. They had plenty of time.
So they had plenty of time to go out. But yeah, normally you don't want to go out.
And we talked about the wind speeds. So when they become a hurricane at 74 miles per hour, that's the maximum sustained wind. So yes, the maximum sustained wind. Not a wind gust, because sometimes those wind gusts, a sustained wind is sort of an average over time, but you know those gusts, they kind of like, if you're outside, you might get kind of pushed around a little bit. That doesn't count as the maximum wind. The maximum sustained wind, which is sort of the overarching wind, starts at hurricane level 74 and gets up to 157 miles per hour and higher. So it can be really, really strong.
I think I know the answer to this one, but Bert wanted to know, does Lee ever sleep?
No. What? What is that? No, I do. I actually do make sleep a priority on a normal basis.
At least 42 minutes a night. At least.
I got a good 42 minutes. I go to bed very early to get up very early.
Janice said, do hurricane hunters get hurt a lot? The answer is no, because they have rigorous maintenance there. The team on the ground is much bigger than the team in the air.
Yeah.
I was blown away when I was at Lakeland Linder.
Blown away.
Oh. Not bad. See,
Okay.
she's very sharp, even with a lack of sleep. The propeller is on, it's a WP-3D Orion. That's the aircraft they use. It's like a flying fortress. The props, just from flying at such a high speed through this turbulent air and raindrops, actually grinds down the propellers.
Wow.
It damages the propellers. They have to almost every flight go and sand down, and basically the plane takes a ridiculous amount of maintenance, but they have a very good team that makes what is a very dangerous job as safe as it
Yeah.
could possibly be. And Erica wanted to know, what altitude do they fly? That varies mission to mission. There's typically a briefing that happens before the mission, generally about 5,000 to 10,000 feet, but that can change. There's also another Hurricane
Yeah.
Hunter jet that flies at a very high altitude to sample the top of the storm, and that would be 40,000 feet, 35,000 to 40,000 feet, so at very high altitude. So that is a bit of a change
And
there.
they have some great names too. Miss Piggy is one of the names of the Hurricane Hunters, and the Kermit. So
Yes.
Yes, I was
Okay.
lucky to
what,
board Mr. Kermit.
you got
That was cool.
Kermit. Okay,
And she asked, how do they retrieve the device once it's recorded the data? Single use.
single use.
It does not get
Yeah,
retrieved.
no, it does not.
All right, and we got a couple, just a couple comments to add to your list. Pet food.
Pet food, yeah.
always
Very
good to
important.
stock up
Don't
on
forget about the pets.
Because I consider pets family, so they need 1 gallon of water per person per day. They need their food. They need the medications. Consider them like family. At least I do.
that. Pickles make sure you're always well stocked.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm sure.
She knows who's boss. It's her.
All right.
Alrighty.
Well, thank you guys for joining us. Again, we want to see your pictures. We want to see that that this is helpful to you. So #WeatherBreak. You can either put it on our News Channel 8 Facebook page. You can email it to us. You can put it on our Twitter page. Just use the #WeatherBreak. We love bringing these lessons to you. We hope it's helpful. And kids, your official e-learning will start on Monday, so we're hoping this lets you get a little bit of a hint of what's going to be happening for you.
It was a fun hint, right?
Fun hint. Well, thanks, Ian, and thanks to JB Buno, who's been running this again for today. He's behind the scenes today, but he'll be back answering some questions and asking some questions tomorrow.